It was one of those nights where exhaustion settled deep in my bones. The office had been chaos all day, and I had stayed late, finishing up a report that no one would read until Monday. By the time I got to the subway station, it was nearly deserted, the eerie silence making the city feel wrong, like a clock that had suddenly stopped ticking. The last train home screeched into the station. I stepped in, looking around the nearly deserted car. A few people sat scattered about. One guy slumped over, probably asleep, an older woman clutching her purse, and a man in a dark coat at the far end of the car. I slid into my usual spot near the middle, letting my head rest against the window. The train jerked forward, and the station blurred outside. I checked my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. Just me, the sound of the subway, and a long ride home. A few stops in, the older woman exited. The sleeping guy stirred, but didn't wake. I looked at the man in the dark coat. He was sitting completely still, staring straight ahead. No phone, no book, not even a twitch. Just staring. I looked away, trying to convince myself I wasn't being weird. But at the next stop, when another passenger left, I noticed something unsettling. He had moved closer. Not dramatically, just a few seats up. But it was enough to make my stomach tighten. I turned my attention back to my phone, willing the train to move faster. Another stop. The sleeping guy stumbled off, leaving just me and the man in the dark coat. He moved again. Now he was just a few seats away, close enough that I could hear him whispering to himself. But the sound of it was low, hurried, and impossible to decipher. I gripped my bag tighter, eyes locked on the reflection in the dark window. I wanted to believe this was a coincidence, that he was just another tired commuter, but I could feel his eyes on me. The train lurched into the second-to-last stop. I had one more to go, just one. Then he slid right next to me. I flinched, turning sharply. He was staring at me now, his eyes wide and unblinking. Up close, he smelled of damp fabric and something stale, like old cigarettes. His lips moved again, but this time I heard the words. "I've been waiting for you." A chill shot through me. My pulse hammered, but I kept my face neutral. If I reacted, would he escalate? Was he armed? I had no idea. I just knew I had to get off the train. Now. As the doors hissed open, I bolted, not giving a damn if I looked crazy. I ran toward the stairs, hearing footsteps behind me. He was following. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I flew up the steps 2 at a time, my breath ragged. The second I reached the turnstiles, I forced myself to look back. He wasn't there. I scanned the platform. Nothing. Just the train pulling away, its lights flickering as it vanished into the tunnel. My hands were shaking. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Maybe he had gotten back on the train. Maybe he had never followed me at all. But I couldn't convince myself I was safe. I walked home quickly, my keys gripped between my fingers. Every shadow seemed too dark. Every footstep behind me felt heavier than it should have. I double-locked my door and checked the peephole 3 times before finally convincing myself to go to bed. The next morning, I tried to put the whole thing behind me. Maybe he had gotten back on the train. Maybe he was just some creepy guy looking for a reaction. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. But the feeling didn't go away. That gnawing unease that stuck with me long after I got home. For the next few nights, I found myself looking at every passing stranger, flinching when I saw a dark coat in the crowd. I switched up my route home. I started taking Ubers instead of the train. I even thought about moving to a different part of the city. Then, about a week later, something happened that made my blood run cold. I was leaving my building early one morning, coffee in one hand, keys in the other, when I saw it. A piece of paper, folded neatly, tucked between my door and the frame. My first thought was that it was some junk flyer, another takeout menu or apartment listing. But as soon as I unfolded it, my stomach dropped. No words, no threats, no explanation. Just a single subway ticket. For the exact same time and route I had taken that night. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I spun around, scanning the street, the sidewalk, the windows across from mine, anywhere he could be watching from. Nothing. I stood there for what felt like forever, the city buzzing around me, normal, oblivious. People rushing to work, cars honking, life moving forward as if nothing had changed. But for me, something had. I wasn't imagining things. He had found me. I never took that train again. In fact, I started avoiding the subway altogether. It didn't matter how much longer the commute took. Being stuck underground with nowhere to run wasn't worth the risk. To this day, I still don't know how he found out where I lived. But I know this. That subway ride wasn't the first time he saw me, and I don't think it was the last. Solo backpacking through Europe was one of those bucket list dreams of mine. After years of saving and planning, I was finally doing it. By the time I boarded the overnight train from Vienna to Budapest, I had already been on the road for 2 weeks, hopping from hostel to hostel, exploring cities, meeting new people, and soaking in every moment. But travel exhaustion is real, and I was looking forward to the overnight train ride. 7 uninterrupted hours of sleep in a private cabin. A luxury compared to the crowded dorm rooms I had been staying in. It was late December, and the train station in Vienna was quiet, the platform illuminated by a sickly yellow glow. I boarded, found my sleeping car, and tossed my backpack onto the small bed. It wasn't exactly the height of luxury, but it was clean, warm, and most importantly, private. As I pulled my jacket off, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Through the narrow gap in my cabin's curtain, I saw a figure standing just outside the next sleeping car. An older woman. She was staring directly at me, completely still. I felt a small jolt of unease. People watching wasn't unusual while traveling. Sometimes curiosity took over. But there was something off about the way she stood. Unmoving, her hands at her sides, eyes locked on me. Just standing there, staring. I pulled my curtain fully shut, giving myself a mental shake. Maybe she was just lost or confused. Or maybe I was just overly tired and reading too much into it. The train started moving. I let out a slow breath, put in my earbuds, and tried to ignore the nagging discomfort creeping along my skin. It was just another passenger. Nothing weird about it. A couple of hours later, I woke up needing to use the restroom. I peeled my blanket away, groggy, and rubbed my eyes. The train swayed gently, the rhythmic clacking of wheels against the tracks filling the quiet. I slid open my cabin door and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. Empty. The dim lighting gave everything a washed-out look, but I saw no one. No eerie woman. No late-night wanderers. Just a long, narrow corridor stretching toward the restroom. I exhaled, feeling a little silly for how uneasy I had been earlier. It was just an old lady. Maybe she was confused. Maybe she was just weird. Whatever the case, I wasn't going to let my imagination get the best of me. I hurried to the restroom, did my business, and splashed some cold water on my face. The mirror reflected my tired eyes, my expression a little more drained than it had been earlier. I needed sleep. But as I stepped back into the hallway, a bolt of panic shot through me. She was there, standing halfway between me and my cabin, closer than before. She wasn't looking at me this time. Her face turned slightly downward, her hands hanging limply at her sides, but she was there. My fingers dug into my palms. The hallway stretched behind her, empty. No signs of other passengers. No train attendant making rounds. Just me and her. and I had no choice but to walk past her to get back to my cabin. I forced myself to take a step forward, clearing my throat slightly. "Excuse me, do you need help?" I kept my voice low, not wanting to wake other passengers. She didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't move. I took another step, then another, hugging the opposite wall as I passed her. Up close, her skin looked sallow under the dim lights, her clothes slightly out of place. A mothball smell clung to the air around her. I hurried back to my cabin. The moment I got inside, I locked the door behind me with shaky hands. I leaned against the wall, heart hammering in my chest. This was ridiculous. She was probably just an odd older woman, nothing more. Maybe she had dementia. Maybe she was confused about her cabin number. I just needed to get back to my bed and go to sleep. I pulled the curtain tight and crawled into bed, every muscle tensed. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. But nothing else happened. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into uneasy rest. I woke up at dawn to the sound of the train slowing into Budapest. Sunlight trickled through the gaps in the curtain. My body ached from sleeping so stiffly, but I was relieved the night was over. I gathered my things and stepped into the hallway, scanning instinctively for the woman. No sign of her. Maybe she had gotten off at an earlier stop. Maybe I had been overreacting. As I passed the train attendant, curiosity got the better of me. "Excuse me," I said. "The woman in the cabin next to mine, do you know when she got off?" The attendant frowned. "Which cabin?" "The one right next to mine. Older woman, kind of pale, staring a lot." I let out a small, nervous laugh, trying to make it seem like no big deal. The attendant's frown deepened. "That cabin is empty, miss. It's been unoccupied for this entire trip." A sharp chill crawled up my spine. "That's not possible. I saw her, multiple times." The attendant shook his head. "I checked the reservations myself. No one's in that cabin." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist that I wasn't imagining things, but the words stuck in my throat. The attendant gave me a polite but dismissive nod and walked away, leaving me standing there, alone with my swirling thoughts. I grabbed my backpack and hurried off the train, the crisp morning air barely registering as I stepped onto the platform. I needed coffee. I needed to breathe. I needed to forget about the whole damn thing. Of all the stories I brought back from the trip, this is by far the strangest and most inexplicable one, and one that I'm pretty sure I'll never forget. I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's just something about them. Places that once thrived, now left to rot, that makes them irresistible. My best friend Danny and I had been urban exploring for years, sneaking into decaying buildings, forgotten tunnels, and crumbling factories. But nothing ever gave me the kind of gut-wrenching unease as that night in Detroit's old train yard. It was the summer of 2018, and we had heard about a stretch of abandoned railcars on the outskirts of the city, rusting away behind a chain-link fence that barely did its job. The train yard was massive, an industrial graveyard of twisted metal and forgotten locomotives. Most people wouldn't go near it. Word was that squatters and drifters made it their home, and some explorers swore they'd seen shadows moving where no one should be. But that just made it all the more tempting for us. We waited until dusk before slipping through a gap in the fence, backpacks stuffed with flashlights, gloves, and a crowbar, just in case. The air was thick with the smell of rust and old oil, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes and hair. We moved carefully, stepping over loose gravel and avoiding the shards of broken glass scattered across the ground. The first few train cars were covered in graffiti, layers of vibrant spray paint blending into a messy, yet mesmerizing masterpiece. We climbed into one, stepping over empty beer cans and old, tattered blankets. Just another spot where someone had crashed for the night. Nothing special. Then we found it. It was a single rusted train car, different from the others. While most were covered in bright tags and bubble letters, this one was almost untouched. Let's check it out. The heavy metal door groaned as we pushed it open, exposing the pitch-black interior. The dust in the air glittered under our flashlight beams, illuminating rows of long, empty seats. The air inside was different, stale, almost suffocating, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. Danny stepped in first, and I followed. "You smell that?" he asked, wrinkling his nose. "Something damp, something rotten." My stomach churned. We moved deeper into the car, scanning the walls, until we found some carvings. Some were words, but they didn't make sense, just strings of letters mixed with numbers. I felt a shiver creep up my arms. "Maybe we should head out," I muttered. Danny chuckled. "Getting spooked already?" Before I could answer, the door slammed shut behind us. The sound was deafening, metal against metal echoing through the hollow car. I spun around, heart hammering. The door was closed. Completely closed. Danny ran to it, pushing and pulling at the handle. "What the hell?" "Wind?" I suggested weakly, though the air had been perfectly still. "Dude, this thing's heavy. It didn't just blow shut." Then we heard it. A shuffle, a scrape, from somewhere inside the train car. I swung my flashlight toward the back, my pulse pounding in my ears. The beam landed on empty seats, dust swirling in the light. Nothing. No one. Danny cursed under his breath. "You hear that?" I nodded slowly. Another sound. Footsteps moving just out of sight. My fingers tightened around my flashlight. Then came the whisper. A breathy, low murmur, like someone just on the edge of speaking but never quite forming words. It came from the far end of the car near the conductor's cabin. Danny took a cautious step forward. "Hello?" The whisper stopped. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling I couldn't explain. I wasn't the type to scare easily, but this was different. It wasn't just the dark or the abandoned setting. It felt wrong, like we weren't supposed to be there. Danny reached for the crowbar in his backpack, gripping it tight. "Let's get the hell out." We both turned to the door, pushing with everything we had. The metal groaned, resisting, but finally it gave way, sliding open just enough for us to slip through. We stumbled out onto the gravel, gasping for air like we'd been suffocating inside. We didn't stop running until we were clear of the train yard. When we finally slowed, Danny bent over, hands on his knees. "What the hell was that?" I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "I don't know." We stood there for a moment, the unspoken fear between us weighing heavier than words. And yet, against all logic, I turned back. The train car stood there, still and lifeless, but something caught my eye, movement inside. Just a shadow shifting slightly, like someone was sitting in one of the seats, watching us. We left that night, swearing never to go back. Danny did some research later, digging through old articles and urban legends about the train yard. He found something that sent an icy chill down my spine. Back in the late 80s, a transient man had been found dead in one of the abandoned cars, locked inside with no way out. Some said he had been hiding from someone. Others claimed he had been trapped. His body wasn't discovered for weeks. And the train car where he died? It was still there. The exact same one we had stepped into. I felt sick reading those words. The article even described the carvings found inside, scratched symbols, numbers, and strange patterns along the walls. The same ones we had seen. The same ones we had touched. "No way," I muttered. "No way." We never went back to that train yard. Didn't even talk about it much after that. But every once in a while, when I'm lying in bed at night, I swear I can hear that sound again. Metal groaning, something shifting in the dark. And I wonder, did we really escape that night, or did something follow us out? Seattle's public transit system had never bothered me much. I'd taken the late-night train countless times, usually heading home after gigs, tired but content, guitar case slung over my shoulder. The trains weren't usually crowded that late, just a handful of night shift workers, the occasional drunk stumbling home, or people like me who preferred the city when it was quiet. That night wasn't any different, at least at first. I got on near downtown, found a seat near the middle of the car, and leaned back, putting my headphones in. It was one of those nights where I just wanted to zone out, let the train rock me toward home, and not think about much. My stop was still a ways off, and I had time to decompress after playing a long set. A few stops in, I noticed him. A guy boarded, disheveled, wearing a worn-out jacket that looked a size too big for him. He wasn't exactly homeless looking, but there was something off about him. He moved strangely, like he was choosing each step with careful thought. The car was mostly empty, yet he made a beeline straight for me and sat down right next to me. I tensed. There were at least a dozen open seats, but for some reason, he had decided to sit shoulder to shoulder with me. I pretended not to notice and kept my headphones in, hoping he'd take the hint. But then he spoke. "You always take this train?" His voice was hoarse. I pulled one earbud out, giving him a short answer. "Yeah, sometimes." He stared at me for an uncomfortably long time before speaking again. "You live alone?" That sent a shiver through me. Who asks a stranger that? "Nah, I got a full house." I didn't. I lived alone in a small studio, but he didn't need to know that. He hummed like he was thinking that over. Then he asked, "Do you ever feel like someone's following you?" My skin crawled. That was it. I needed to move. At the next stop, I stood up casually, trying not to seem too obvious, and made my way to the next car. The guy didn't follow right away, and I started to relax. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just a weird dude who didn't know how to make conversation. But 2 stops later, I heard the door slide open. I looked up, and there he was. He entered the car slowly, scanning the seats before locking eyes with me. Then, just like before, he walked past rows of empty seats and sat right next to me again. This time, he didn't say anything. He just sat there, breathing steady, staring at his hands. My heartbeat picked up. I wasn't looking for a reason to panic, but this wasn't normal. I had changed cars, and he had followed me. I had to test something. At the next stop, I got up again, this time more abruptly, and moved to another car. I sat near the exit, watching the door. 2 minutes later, it slid open. There he was again. I wasn't imagining it now. This guy was following me, and he wasn't even trying to be subtle. He moved like he had all the time in the world. Like he knew I wasn't going anywhere. I stood up fast and switched cars again. I heard the door behind me slide open once more, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. Panic settled into my chest. I had to get off this train. I checked my phone. 3 more stops until mine. I wasn't going to wait. The train slowed into the next station, and I made my move. As soon as the doors opened, I stepped out and immediately turned as if I was heading toward the exit. But at the last second, just before the doors shut, I pivoted sharply and darted back inside. The doors slid closed, and the train began moving. I turned to look at the platform. He was standing there watching me. He didn't look angry. He didn't look surprised. He just stood there, staring as the train carried me away. I felt relieved, my entire body buzzing with adrenaline. He was gone. I was safe. Or so I thought. The next day, something still felt off. I took a different train route, switching up my routine just in case. When I got to my usual station near my apartment, I didn't want to go straight there just in case he had somehow followed me. I decided to grab coffee at a shop nearby, killing time. That's when I saw him. Across the street, standing near a bus stop, he was watching me. I didn't wait. I went straight into the coffee shop, found a seat near the back, and pretended to be on my phone. After about 10 minutes, I peeked outside again. He was gone. I made my way home, nerves on edge, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The paranoia was real now. From that day on, I never ever took the same train route twice in a row. I never saw him again, but I still wonder, was he just a weird, lonely guy, or was he waiting for the right opportunity? I'm glad I never found out. If these stories made you side-eye your next train ride, smash that like button and share this with a friend who loves a good scare. Want more terrifying horror stories? Subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss another spine-chilling upload. Ever had a creepy experience on a train? Drop your story in the comments or email me. I'd love to feature it. Stay safe out there, and remember, just because a train car looks empty doesn't mean it is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.